Samantha had always been known as the quiet one in her group of friends. While others were out partying or exploring the thrill of university life, she preferred staying in, engrossed in her studies, focusing on her goals and the future she was working so hard to achieve. She was never drawn to the loud, social scene, but even Samantha found herself longing for meaningful connections and friendships. When Samantha first arrived at university, she had no idea she would meet people like Rachel, Emma, and Jess. They seemed to come from a completely different world. Rachel, with her charismatic energy, could walk into any room and command attention. Jess, the adventurer, thrived on spontaneity, always pulling the group into new experiences. And Emma, the jokester, had a gift for making anyone laugh, even on their worst days. Despite their differences, they quickly bonded. Samantha was captivated by their personalities, and to her surprise, they were drawn to her calm and steady nature. In many ways, their friendship was an unlikely one. Samantha often wondered what they saw in her. While she admired their vibrancy, she felt like the odd one out, a background character in their fast-paced lives. But Rachel, Emma, and Jess always made her feel valued, even if she didn't fully understand why. Their friendship became a cornerstone of her university experience, grounding her through the whirlwind of deadlines, exams, and future plans. They were her escape, her family, away from home. As the final year of university approached, the looming reality of graduation cast a shadow over their time together. Samantha felt it creeping in, a quiet sense of dread at the thought of everything changing. Rachel had already secured a position in marketing at a major firm. Jess was planning to travel abroad for a year, and Emma had been accepted into a prestigious comedy writing program. Samantha, on the other hand, was still trying to figure out where she fit into the world outside of academia. One evening, after a particularly stressful week of exams, Rachel came up with an idea. "We need a break," she declared, her eyes bright with excitement. "One last trip before we all go our separate ways. Just the four of us, like old times." Samantha hesitated, as she often did when it came to anything outside her routine. She knew how busy they all were, and part of her was reluctant to spend an entire weekend away. But as she looked at her friends, saw the eagerness in their faces, she knew she couldn't say no. Deep down, she wanted to make more memories with them before everything changed. Rachel found the perfect spot, a secluded cabin by a lake, far away from the pressures of university and the impending graduation. It was just the kind of place Samantha had always imagined, surrounded by nature, with no distractions from the outside world. The cabin was a place to reconnect, to slow down, and to reflect on the years they had spent together. The drive to the cabin was filled with the kind of carefree energy that had defined their friendship from the beginning. The windows were down, music blared from the speakers, and Emma and Jess were singing along at the top of their lungs, completely off-key but full of joy. Samantha sat in the passenger seat watching the countryside roll by, her heart light for the first time in weeks. Rachel was behind the wheel as usual, her confidence evident in the way she handled the road. She glanced over at Samantha and flashed her a smile. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. Samantha smiled back, though there was a slight unease in her chest that she couldn't quite shake. "I think so," she replied. "I've been looking forward to it, honestly." Rachel nodded, her eyes returning to the road. "It's going to be a weekend to remember," she said with a wink, and Samantha believed her. When they arrived at the cabin, it was even more beautiful than Samantha had imagined. The lake stretched out before them, its surface shimmering in the late afternoon sunlight. Tall trees surrounded the cabin, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. The air smelled fresh, and the sounds of the city felt a million miles away. They spent the first day swimming in the lake, laughing and splashing each other like children. Emma, of course, kept the mood light with her endless stream of jokes, while Jess challenged them all to a race across the lake. Samantha joined in, letting herself be swept up in the fun. She was surprised by how easily she could let go of her usual worries in the presence of her friends. It was like the weight of the world had lifted, even if only for a little while. That evening, they built a fire outside the cabin, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. As the fire crackled and the sky darkened, the conversation turned to more serious topics, their future, their fears, and the uncertainty that lay ahead. Samantha listened quietly as her friends talked about their plans, feeling both proud and envious of how sure they seemed about the next steps in their lives. "I can't believe this is all coming to an end," Jess said, staring into the flames. "It feels like we just started, and now we're all heading in different directions." "It's crazy, isn't it?" Rachel agreed. "But that's why we need weekends like this, to remind us of how far we've come and how important we are to each other." Samantha nodded, though she didn't say anything. The thought of their group splitting up left her with a hollow feeling in her chest. She didn't want to lose this connection, this sense of belonging that she had found with them. But part of her knew that no matter what, things were going to change, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. As the fire died down, Rachel suggested they head inside for the night. Samantha assumed they would all retire to their separate rooms, but Rachel had a different idea. "Let's all sleep in the master bedroom together," she said with a grin, "like we used to do in the dorms. One last sleepover before we grow up." Samantha hesitated for a moment. It had been years since they had shared a bed, and though the idea was innocent enough, something about it made her feel uneasy. But she didn't want to ruin the moment, so she agreed, following her friends into the cabin. The master bedroom was spacious, with a large, comfortable bed that easily fit all four of them. They piled in together, laughing as they tried to find comfortable positions. Rachel, as usual, ended up beside Samantha. The closeness wasn't new. Samantha had slept next to Rachel before. But tonight, something about it felt different. Rachel's hand brushed against Samantha's arm as they settled in, and Samantha felt a jolt of awareness shoot through her. She glanced over at Rachel, who was lying on her back, staring up at the ceiling. There was a quiet tension in the air between them, a subtle shift that Samantha couldn't quite place. As the laughter and conversation from earlier faded into soft whispers, Rachel turned her head to look at Samantha. Her expression was serious, more vulnerable than Samantha had ever seen her. "Sam," she began, her voice low, "there's something I need to tell you." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rachel hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," she said softly, "and I didn't know if I should say anything, but I care about you. A lot." Samantha blinked, confused by the sudden shift in tone. "Of course you do," she replied, trying to keep the mood light. "We're best friends." But Rachel shook her head, her eyes locking with Samantha's. "No, it's more than that," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've had feelings for you for a while now. I just didn't know how to tell you." Samantha felt her breath catch in her throat. She hadn't seen this coming. She had always thought of Rachel as her closest friend, someone she could rely on, someone who had been there for her through everything. But this was something entirely different. I didn't know," Samantha whispered, her mind racing. "I've never thought about us like that." Rachel smiled, but it was a nervous smile, filled with uncertainty. "I know," she said softly, "and I didn't want to make things weird between us. But I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. I needed you to know." Samantha lay there, her mind reeling. She had never imagined that Rachel might have feelings for her, and now that it was out in the open, she didn't know how to process it. She cared about Rachel deeply, but she had never thought of their relationship as anything more than friendship. And yet, as she lay there beside her, she couldn't deny the warmth that Rachel's presence brought her, the sense of safety and comfort she had always felt when they were together. "I don't know what to say," Samantha admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything right now," Rachel replied, her hand gently brushing against Samantha's. "I just wanted you to know how I feel, and whatever happens, we'll always be friends. I don't want to lose that." Samantha didn't pull her hand away. The truth was, she didn't feel uncomfortable, just confused. She had never considered the possibility that her best friend could have feelings for her like this. But now that it was out in the open, she wasn't sure what to do with it. Did she feel the same, or was she simply overwhelmed by the revelation? As the room fell into silence, the weight of Rachel's confession hung in the air between them. Samantha's mind raced with thoughts of what this meant for their future, for their friendship. But despite the uncertainty, she couldn't deny the connection she felt in that moment. There was something deeper between them, something she had never fully acknowledged before. Rachel lay back down, her hand still resting lightly against Samantha's. "Whatever happened, Sam," she said quietly, "I don't want things to change between us. You mean too much to me." Samantha turned to face her, meeting Rachel's gaze. There was vulnerability in her eyes, a raw honesty that Samantha had never seen before. She wanted to say something, to reassure Rachel that everything would be okay, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she simply squeezed Rachel's hand, letting her know she was still there, still present in the moment. The night stretched on, and as they lay there in the quiet of the cabin, Samantha felt the weight of the world shift. It wasn't a dramatic change, but a subtle, quiet realization. Things between her and Rachel would never be the same again. The cabin was still and quiet, with only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside. Samantha could hear the soft breathing of Jess and Emma, who had fallen asleep on the other side of the bed, blissfully unaware of the conversation that had just taken place. But Samantha was far from sleep. Her mind was racing, thoughts swirling as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. She and Rachel had been best friends for years. They had shared everything: laughter, tears, secrets, and dreams. But this was different. Rachel's confession had opened a door Samantha hadn't even realized was there, and now that it had been opened, she wasn't sure what to do with it. Rachel lay next to her, close but not too close, her hands still resting lightly against Samantha's. The warmth of her touch was comforting, familiar, yet now it felt different, charged with a new kind of energy that Samantha hadn't felt before. She wanted to say something, to ask Rachel how long she had felt this way, to understand what had changed. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, Samantha lay there, staring up at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. She couldn't deny that she cared deeply about Rachel. But was it the same way Rachel felt about her? Could she see them being more than friends? She didn't know, and the uncertainty was overwhelming. The next morning, Samantha woke early, long before the others stirred. She quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Rachel, and made her way outside. The morning air was crisp and cool, and the lake was still, its surface reflecting the pale light of dawn. Samantha stood at the edge of the water, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to clear her mind. She had always been someone who liked to have everything figured out. She thrived on routine, on knowing what was coming next. But this was something she hadn't planned for. The thought of losing her friendship with Rachel terrified her. What if things became awkward between them? What if Rachel expected something Samantha couldn't give? As she stood there, staring out at the calm water, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Rachel approaching, her hands shoved in her pockets, a tentative smile on her face. "Hey," Rachel said softly. "Hey," Samantha replied, her voice equally soft. Rachel stepped up beside her, looking out at the lake. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the previous night's conversation hanging in the air between them. "I didn't mean to freak you out," Rachel said after a while. I didn't want to keep it from you anymore." Samantha nodded, her eyes still on the water. "You didn't freak me out," she said quietly. "I'm just trying to process everything." Rachel glanced over at her, concern in her eyes. "I don't want to make you feel pressured," she said. "I know this is a lot to take in. I just wanted to be honest with you. But if you don't feel the same way, that's okay. I don't want things to change between us." Samantha sighed, her breath visible in the cool morning air. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never thought about us like that, but I care about you, Rachel. I need time to figure it out." Rachel nodded, her expression softening. "Take all the time you need," she said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." Samantha finally turned to face her, meeting Rachel's gaze. There was so much emotion in her eyes: hope, vulnerability, fear. It was strange seeing Rachel, the confident, charismatic one, in this light. Samantha had always looked up to her, admired her strength and self-assuredness. But now, Rachel was letting her guard down, showing a side of herself that Samantha had never seen before. "I don't want to lose you," Samantha said, her voice trembling slightly. "You won't," Rachel replied, her voice steady. "No matter what happens, We'll always be friends. That won't change." Samantha nodded, feeling a small sense of relief wash over her. She didn't know what the future held, but Rachel's reassurance gave her some comfort. They stood there for a while longer, watching the sun rise over the lake, the silence between them no longer heavy, but peaceful. Over the next few days, the group continued with their planned activities, hiking through the woods, swimming in the lake, and enjoying each other's company. Jess and Emma were completely unaware of the tension that lingered between Samantha and Rachel, and for the most part, things seemed normal. But there were moments, fleeting glances, lingering touches, that reminded Samantha of the conversation they had shared that night. Samantha found herself thinking about Rachel more often, noticing things she hadn't before. The way Rachel's eyes sparkled when she laughed, the way she instinctively reached for Samantha's hand during scary parts of movies, the way she always seemed to know when Samantha was feeling down. It wasn't that these things were new. Rachel had always been this way, but now they seemed to carry a different meaning. As the trip came to an end and they packed up the cabin, Samantha felt a strange mix of emotions. She was sad to be leaving, knowing that this weekend had been a kind of last hurrah before they all went their separate ways. But there was also a sense of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, things between her and Rachel could become something more. On the drive back to campus, Samantha found herself sitting next to Rachel again, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they navigated the winding roads back to reality. The tension between them had eased somewhat, but the unspoken words still lingered in the air. It wasn't until they arrived back at university that Samantha realized how much had changed. Graduation was only a few weeks away, and the reality of their impending separation hit her hard. She would be moving to a different city for her job, while Rachel would be staying behind. The thought of being apart from her friends, from Rachel, made her chest ache. A few days after they returned from the trip, Samantha found herself standing outside Rachel's dorm room, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't planned on coming here, but something inside her had pushed her to make the trip across campus. She knocked on the door, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. Rachel opened the door, her face lighting up when she saw Samantha standing there. "Hey," she said, stepping aside to let her in. "I wasn't expecting you." "I wasn't planning on coming," Samantha admitted, stepping into the room. "But I've been thinking, about us, about everything." Rachel's expression softened, and she gestured for Samantha to sit down on the bed. "What's on your mind?" she asked, sitting down beside her. Samantha took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how you feel, and I realized I don't want to lose you, Rachel. You're so important to me." Rachel's eyes searched hers, a flicker of hope in them. "You won't lose me," she said softly. Samantha nodded, her heart racing. "I've never thought about us being more than friends," she admitted. "But now that you've said it, I can't stop thinking about it. And I don't know where this will lead, but I want to find out." Rachel's breath caught, and she looked at Samantha with a mixture of surprise and hope. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samantha nodded, feeling a strange sense of certainty wash over her. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm sure." A slow smile spread across Rachel's face, and she reached for Samantha's hand, her touch warm and familiar. "We'll take it slow," she said gently. "There's no rush. We'll figure it out together." Samantha smiled, a sense of peace settling over her. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel uncertain or scared. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure: Rachel would be a part of it, no matter what. As they sat there, hands intertwined, Samantha felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. The future was still unknown, still full of challenges and changes, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She had Rachel, and that was enough. The week leading up to graduation was a whirlwind of emotions. There were final exams, graduation rehearsals, and bittersweet goodbyes as they prepared to leave behind the place that had been their home for the past 4 years. Samantha found herself caught between excitement for the future and sadness at the thought of leaving it all behind. Rachel was a constant presence during those final days. They spent every spare moment together, whether it was grabbing coffee in the student union, studying in the library, or simply walking around campus, taking in the sights and sounds one last time. There was a quiet understanding between them now, a sense that they were building something that would last beyond the walls of the university. The night before graduation, Rachel invited Samantha over to her dorm room for a quiet evening together. Jess and Emma were off at a party, celebrating their last night as students, but Samantha and Rachel had chosen something more intimate, a night for just the two of them. They ordered pizza, watched old movies, and talked about their plans for the future. It was a simple evening, but it was perfect. As the night wore on, they found themselves sitting on Rachel's bed, the glow of the TV casting a soft light across the room. "I'm going to miss this," Rachel said quietly, her eyes on the screen, but her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Samantha looked at her, her heart aching at the thought of leaving. "Me too," she admitted, "but it's not the end, you know. We'll still see each other." Rachel nodded, but there was a hint of sadness in her smile. "I know. It's just, I've gotten used to having you around all the time. It's going to be hard being apart." Samantha's chest tightened. She hadn't realized how much Rachel's presence had become a part of her daily life. The thought of not seeing her every day, not hearing her laugh, or feeling the comfort of her touch was harder than she had expected. But Samantha knew that their connection wasn't bound by proximity. They had built something strong, something that would last, even if they weren't in the same place. And now, with graduation looming, she was more determined than ever to hold on to that. "We'll make it work," Samantha said softly, reaching for Rachel's hand. "No matter what." Rachel looked at her, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "You really believe that?" Samantha smiled, squeezing her hand. "Yeah, I do. We've come this far, haven't we? We can handle whatever comes next." For a moment, Rachel didn't say anything. She just looked at Samantha, her gaze intense and full of emotion. Then, without a word, she leaned in, pressing her forehead against Samantha's. The world seemed to slow down in that moment, the noise of the TV fading into the background as they sat there, their foreheads touching, their hands intertwined. It was a simple gesture, but it was filled with so much meaning, so much unspoken emotion. Samantha closed her eyes, letting the warmth of Rachel's presence wash over her. She didn't need words right now. She didn't need to know what the future held. All she needed was this moment, this connection, this feeling of being seen and understood by the person she cared about most. "I'm glad you're in my life," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. Samantha smiled, her heart swelling with affection. "I'm glad you're in mine too." They stayed like that for a long time, just sitting in the quiet, taking comfort in each other's presence. It was a moment of peace, a moment that Samantha knew she would carry with her, no matter where life took them. Graduation day arrived in a blur of caps and gowns, speeches and applause. The campus was filled with excitement, the air buzzing with the energy of new beginnings. Samantha stood with her friends, smiling for photos and hugging classmates goodbye, but her thoughts kept drifting to Rachel. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Samantha found Rachel standing off to the side, her cap in her hand, a wistful smile on her face. "There you are," Samantha said, walking over to her. Rachel looked up, her smile widening when she saw Samantha. "There you are," she replied softly. For a moment, they just stood there, taking in the gravity of the moment. This was it, the end of their time at university, the beginning of the rest of their lives. Samantha stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "We made it," she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. Rachel nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We did," she whispered. Without thinking, Samantha reached for Rachel's hand, holding it tightly. There were no words left to say, no promises to make. They had already said everything they needed to. Now it was time to embrace the future, together. As they stood there, hand in hand, surrounded by the buzz of celebration, Samantha felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever came next, she knew she wasn't facing it alone. She had Rachel, and that was all that mattered.